Hey YouTube, Marshall here. Welcome back to the Realignment. For this Thanksgiving week, I've got a great episode that will take us into a time which, if you really think about it, is the definition where we should be caring most about the in-person and the actual over the digital and separate. Speaking with author David Sachs about his book, The Future is Analog: How to Create a More Modern World. Book's theme is that basically over the past 2 years, we saw this promised digital utopia, Peloton rides, Zoom calls, metaverses. It's pretty clear on a couple different levels that hasn't quite worked out. So what does it look like to find the healthy in-between that prioritizes the analog? Hope you all enjoy this conversation. David Sachs, welcome to the Realignment.
Marshall, it is great to be here.
Yeah, I'm really glad to speak with you. It's funny, in the book, yeah, no worries. In the book, you talk about how your initial book tour in 2020 was wrecked by COVID. With this current book, you are kind of actually hitting a peak moment for your overall thesis. Tech stocks are down. There's a lot of dissatisfaction with the metaverse at Meta. So you've seen both ends of the good and bad timing for an actual book. I'll say, though, this is a good time to define terms because, as you also note, the word analog can mean a lot of different things to different people. Let's start there. What do you mean by analog?
In the simplest way, I mean not digital. It's a pretty broad definition. It's an imperfect definition. I have many people who take umbrage at it, especially engineers. I had a lovely German engineer write me a long handwritten letter explaining why it was wrong. But essentially, digital is the language of computers. It's ones and zeros, binary code. And so anything that has that at kind of its core of its activity or its ideal is what I consider digital. And what I consider analog is the opposite of that, things that have sort of tangible, tactile, physical at their core. It doesn't mean that there's not an interplay between them. I could talk about independent bookstores being analog, and they all have POS systems and computers and websites and blogs and social media accounts. But the core thing is the physical store where there's books compared to, say, Amazon, which is a online store, right? And so that's the definition that I'm using.
And what's interesting here is you wrote a previous book called The Revenge of Analog in 2016. So you've been very bullish on the analog, the non-digital for a while. But if you think about it, The Revenge of Analog came out during a different era of tech. It's not a response to COVID. It's not a response to everything going digital and quote unquote moving forward 10 years in a week and all of the dissatisfaction we experienced that we'll obviously get into during this podcast. But when you were writing in 2015, 2016, what were your thoughts on the analog versus the digital?
At that time, I was really chronicling an unfolding phenomenon that I was sort of witnessing, which was that, since 2007, when the first friends I knew started getting smartphones and, Twitter was ascendant. Facebook is, I think, 3 years old at the point. Everybody's, spending more and more time on social media, whether it's personally or professionally. The iPhone comes out later that year. So much of our lives, which perhaps included work on computers or time spent on computers, spent a lot of time on the internet, and browser suddenly was like with us everywhere now. It was this assumption at the time that the non-digital things that were holding on would sort of fade away very quickly, as we'd seen with CDs and Napster. And what I was witnessing was kind of this opposite countervailing trend that I was seeing in a bunch of places. Records and record stores were sort of opening up again and growing in cities that I knew. I saw a board game cafe open up around the corner from me, and it was packed every night. Everybody I knew, even if they were entrepreneurs in the tech world, were writing their thoughts in moleskin journals and being really sort of deliberate about the methodology they were using and how they were using paper. And so it was sort of this interesting, wasn't a pendulum swing against it, but it was this almost parallel movement that was happening that at the exact time when everyone expected analog to sort of disappear, actually was showing surprising growth. And every year the skeptics were like, well, this is just a fad. It's the record thing, it's going to go away in a year. And it's like, year after year after year after year since 2007, vinyl record sales have continued to go up, and sales of paper books have continued to grow. And, the number of independent bookstores have grown. And what I saw and chronicled in that book was the reasons behind this countervailing trend, the revenge of analog, as I called it. And what that said in a much bigger way about, the way we relate to technology, the way we relate to ourselves in the world.
It's interesting. I just bought my first record player, and it's been 7 years since you bought that book. So the trend is there, and it's really fun. I saw a friend in New York over the summer, and they had a record player, and it was just a fun experience that you can.
So what was the first record you put on?
What was the first record I put on? We went to, this is embarrassing. That's a good question. This is both embarrassing, but if you know, we went to a wedding in Tennessee, and there was a store that had records, and they had the Big Little Lies soundtrack, which is an amazing soundtrack. And it's kind of funny, as our friends pointed out after hearing about this purchase, the best vinyl records, or not all of the best, but many good vinyl records, are actually like TV show compilations. Because, for example, we got The Graduate, with Dustin Hoffman from the 1960s. Half of it is like random instrumentals that actually aren't useful. And then you kind of want to, okay, come on, like get to Mrs. Robinson.
Get to the Simon and Garfunkel.
Get to the Simon and Garfunkel. So when you have like a TV soundtrack on vinyl, it's actually good because it's kind of like a mixtape. Every single thing you have is a banger. But so I want to go related to vinyl, talk about this CD-ROM to MP3 to digital example, because I think it's the definition of the peak. Here's an example of how digital is superior to analog. Back in the 1990s, you had the CD-ROM, the record company or the CD, the music label makes you buy 20 songs. They charge you $20. You only want 2 of them. Wow, with iTunes, you can buy the 2 that you actually care about. You've saved money. You can have 1,000 songs in your pocket. It is just peak. This is obviously a superior economical and personal enjoyment experience. How many other examples can you think of digital being that clearly superior to the analog? Because people use this metaphor often, but I'm kind of always starting to wonder, like, how many times have we seen that clearly of a experience boost?
Word processors compared to typewriters. I was supposed to go speak at a typewriter store in Philadelphia 2 nights ago. Unfortunately, I got COVID and had to cancel that part of the book tour. And there was this resurgence of typewriters, and there's, people collect them and people who are really into them. It's not something I've delved into, though I respect it. But, I remember I grew up when I was a kid, and the first assignments I had to do were on typewriters for school. And then we got a PC, and, we had different programs, and now I live in Microsoft Word. So that's a pretty sort of obvious one. I guess, other programs like Excel or whatever it is. Cameras is also another very obvious one. Like, I wrote about the resurgence of film photography in Revenge of Analog, the growth of things like, Polaroid photos. This is from the Revenge of Analog book launch 6 years ago. Much better looking then. And that's been a huge growing category, one of the biggest growing categories in the sort of camera thing. But yeah, this is the thing that I take photos with more often, right? It's this little, like, tiny little thing in the back of my phone. And that's been, game changing in all sorts of different ways. But it didn't make the previous technology obsolete. It changed its value. It made it more niche. It made it more valued and valuable in a different sort of way. And that's often what happens. That's very Marshall McLuhan, but it is sort of a change in the value of those different things. And I think once something is no longer the default, once vinyl records are no longer the only option you have, the sort of default option is unlimited streaming on Spotify or YouTube or whatever platform you're using, then the old technology has it sort of assumes its new value, and you actually judge it more on its merits, because you're not saying, oh, well, this is clearly better. You're actually able to make that judgment on your own. And you can have both. That's why I have, hundreds of records that I listen to, but I also listen to Spotify all the time, right? I'm not playing records in the car.
Yeah, that'd be a beyond parody
Very
level of commitment to the bit too.
Exactly.
You could definitely make a YouTube thing of that. Here's what I want to wonder about too. Then, what is the difference between a analog technology that can make a resurgence and one that won't. So vinyl records, the typewriter, I have a hard time imagining, let's say, Generation Alpha, people 13 and younger, getting super into CD-ROMs 20 years from now. Like what do we kind of see as the difference? Like, what is it about like vinyl, the Polaroid camera, the typewriter that makes them even a useful alternative to their digital counterparts?
Yeah. I think there's two things, right? One is does it give people pleasure? And so, there's no logical reason for people wanting this stuff. There's no logical reason for you to go out and spend $200-300 on a turntable and, $20 a record, right?
Yeah.
Or more. Maybe you're getting them, at a garage sale. There's no reason to go and buy an Instax film camera for $100 and then pay $1 per picture. It defies logic, but it gives people pleasure. They enjoy it. They enjoy something about it. They enjoy the physicality of it. They enjoy looking at the design on the sleeve and having something behind them, like you have those books there. The same thing goes with books. There is no reason, logically speaking, why you should buy this hunk of dead tree that has words on it when you can get those same words for half the price on your Kindle or your Nook or your Kobo or whatever. You're not getting any extra words in the book. But 9 out of 10 readers prefer paper books. Why? Because it gives them a certain pleasure. They prefer the tactility. They like displaying them. They like that they don't have to worry about the battery life and compatibility and connections and all these things that happen with ebooks. Like ebooks, I've had 2 ebooks die on me, and after the second one died, I was like, forget it. I'm done with these things. This is ridiculous. I don't know. I don't want to buy another one of these things for $100 or $200. Like, I'll just take books. So there's that. And I think the other thing is kind of a practicality. And that's when it applies to work. So the Moleskine notebook or any other sort of notebook or whiteboards or these sorts of things, like the reason they're used by people in all sorts of jobs and creative industries and every company in Silicon Valley and sort of tech company, like they're all scribbling on whiteboards, is because it works. It works better. It has a utility that's different. And in certain cases or certain scenarios, it provides a utility that's different. And I guess in that case, superior for that task, whatever it's brainstorming or drawing out a design or something, than the digital alternative. The digital alternative is trying to replicate the tools and people get caught up in it. And I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
I wrote about this in Revenge of Analog. So in 2008, 2009, during the recession, there was a designer at Google in San Francisco named John Skidgel. And John was a user experience and interface designer. So like, what does the website look like and how does it work, right? And he noticed that the designs of many of his younger colleagues were not up to snuff. They were really kind of, they were turning these kind of half-baked designs for different, the send button on Gmail or whatever it's the design there. So John's an illustrator, and he said, well, why don't I teach a course on how to draw for design? And so every, one came in who signed up for this course, and they got a paper notebook and 3 different size pens. And he's like, all right, first assignment, right? First lesson, how to draw a straight line. You draw up to like vertically up and down, not horizontally, and you bend your elbow. You don't keep your arm straight, right? Okay, now we're going to draw 2 parallel lines. Now we're going to draw dotted lines, and on until they could basically sketch out any sort of idea they had. And he often had people coming to him and saying, well, why do we need to do this? We have Google Draw or Adobe Suite or whatever. Like, these are so much more powerful tools, and we have digital pens and all that. He's like, well, let's think about it for 2 ways, right? One is, if you're in the elevator and you have this brilliant idea for what YouTube should look like, and in walks the head of the company, I guess at that time, Eric Schmidt or Sergey or whatever, and you have 30 seconds in this elevator to communicate your idea. You're going to like pull out a tablet and start a thing, or you're going to like take a pen and draw it on your hand and then just get your stock options and you're set for life. The other thing, so that's like the speed and ease of the communication. The other thing is that when people get into software has rules, it has limitations. And the rules and limitations, people can kind of get lost in them, right? It's like, oh, I want this to be blue. Well, what color blue? We have a million color blues. Do you want cerulean 588 or indigo 623? Or like, you could like tweak with these lines forever. And people were just getting lost in those details. When you do it on paper as the sort of first rough idea, that gets the idea out in the most basic way from your brain to somewhere physical. And then you can go and refine it in the software. So that practicality, that utility really drives it for a lot of other reasons as well.
Something I'd like to get to in terms of your current book, it's called The Future is Analog, but especially in the first, introductory chapter, you make clear that this is very much a response to that world of 2020. It's March, everything goes digital, and there were a lot of folks in a variety of different industries, basically any industry you could imagine, really triumphantly speaking about how this digital future was going to be better. So before we get to why you think the future is analog, take us to, let's say, June 2020. What was the digital future supposed to look like in terms of like the competing vision?
Well, not even June. I mean, we're talking like March, April. Right?
I'm trying to be the most generous. So let me be precise why I said June. So, you're out of lockdown.
Sun was out in June.
Sun was out in June. You're out of lockdown. It's slightly better. There's more optimism. Let me put it that way. Especially I work in tech. Like there was much more optimism and excitement. So June 2020.
Yeah. Well, it was. Look what's happened these past couple months, right? Look at the boom in online shopping. No one's ever going back to stores again. Like this is the permanent change that's happened. Look at how many people are working remotely all over the world. Pretty much anyone who works at a desk and a computer is at home working at a computer from their desk at home. We don't need to have big offices. We don't need commutes. We can change cities. People don't even need to live in cities. Everyone moved to Austin. Everyone moved to Boulder. Everyone get a house in the country, the Hudson Valley. You can live on whatever the hell on Hudson. You don't need to live in New York City with the rats. This was this sort of dream, right? The ease of everything was just this sort of like, this is great. Like you can do things and it's easier now. You don't have to go to your stupid family reunion or Thanksgiving dinner. Like just zoom in, your mom will mail you some stuffing and turkey and you could, DoorDash it and you'll get a pretty good turkey and stuffing. And like, you don't have to sit next to your annoying cousin or the crazy like Trump loving uncle, conspiracy theorist, racist or whatever. Like, this is great. Like it's all just easy and removed. And you want to get some exercise. There's a Peloton bike right downstairs. Like just sit on it 20 minutes, let's go, Marshall. Come on, pump those legs. And that's it. You wake up a sweat. You feel great. The convenience of everything. And then at night, you want entertainment. The world of performances is at your fingertips. You want to watch The Graduate? There it is. You want to watch, Lin-Manuel Miranda singing on Hamilton on Broadway? There he is. You want to watch a Jay-Z concert? There's Jizza, right? And that was sort of this promise that everything that had been leading up to that moment, really since the dawn of the PC era, and especially sort of the internet and mobile computing, was that this was our destiny. Our destiny was to live increasingly digitally mediated lives. And that would be better for time. It would be better for our money. It would be better for our sense of freedom. It would liberate us. It would liberate us from the shackles of the sort of analog world that had held us back with its inefficiencies and need to drive places and so on.
And the key thing
was the promise.
That was the promise. So then as you are setting up well, what actually happened? Actually, let me take a quick pause, actually. Yeah. What were your thoughts about that as you were hearing that message? So let's not zoom into 2021, 2022, right? As a person who'd written a book called The Revenge of Analog, what was your immediate June 2020 reaction to all of this?
I was skeptical of it from the get-go, and I'd been skeptical of it for years. And at that point, I knew, having lived through the previous 3 months of living like this, that it was no way that I or most other people I knew wanted to live. There were certain areas where people were like, well, I'm okay with working from home, but the rest of it, whatever. But for the most part, it was not an improvement upon the life I had, that most people I knew were dying to get back to some semblance of the normalcy that they had, that the new normal that was being proclaimed by, the minds of sort of the digital industry, by the minds of Silicon Valley, by the pundits and so forth, was not one that most people were willing to sort of acquiesce to. And so I was skeptical of it from the get-go. And that's the genesis of this book. I was being contacted by media and podcasts from all over the world and asked to provide my feedback on it as the analog guy. What does this mean for the future of analog now that analog's dead? I was like, whoa, hold on. Who said that? Oh, well, I read on LinkedIn an article. I saw on CNBC someone saying that, brick and mortar commerce is dead because look at these stores here. It's like, well, these stores are closed by, government edict. And when the stores reopened here in Toronto, actually in that June, like there were lines around the block. And not just for like groceries and flour and diapers. Record stores. I went on record store day, which was the day the stores reopened, 2020. And there was a lineup around the block for Sonic Boom, which is one of the biggest stores here in Toronto. And people just like lined up in masks, waiting their turn because of spacing or whatever to go inside and like thumb through records. They could have gone on Discogs and bought those things, or Amazon or Sonic Boom's website. I ordered records online during that time, but it's not the same thing. There's no joy in that. You're just hunting for a thing and getting it. Going to a store is like an experience that's very much a part of who we are as humans. And I knew that as soon as people could go back to, the things that they enjoyed and things that gave them meaning and the places and relationships that they wanted to, they would. With, some exceptions. The work thing is still less clear. Right. But in other cases like school, no one's arguing for, kids to stay in virtual school anymore. I mean, if anyone argues that, they'd be like run out of town on a rail covered in tar and feathers.
It's funny. I'm curious about, I do media, I interview people. So I like thinking theoretically about like why people say what they say. I remember my first hint that there was something off about the future's digital analysis was I was listening to Pivot with Kara Swisher, Scott Galloway. Scott's been on the show, so huge fan of them both. But I remember they were talking about why Peloton was awesome, and they were saying like you don't have to go to the gym, you've got your space. And I realized I was like, wait a second, like Kara, you're famous. So Kara was talking about this, like you're famous. When you go to the gym, there's someone like walking up to you and saying, oh my gosh, like I'm listening to you right now. She was talking like, she's like, I kind of want my space. I'm like, that experience that you were having with the Peloton is entirely different than 99.9999% of actual people who are interacting with these spaces. So I'm curious to you, like to what degree does I don't want to say like out of touchness, like as if it's like someone's fault, but to what degree did let's say, shut in, introverted tech person talking about how you don't have to go to an office and you could just focus on your computer and code? How much did the like backgrounds of people who were most likely to be evangelizing the digital play in distorting their analysis at first?
Beautiful question. And it's so true, right? This is coming from the world that was trying to deliver this version of the future out of its own perspective. We're talking young, male, single, wealthy, mostly white engineers, right? Who are the same people who are inventing like meal replacement milkshakes. So they don't have to eat food, so they can work harder in the Twitter mines for Elon. I mean, what kind of future is that? But in that world, that future makes sense. That future is desirable. This is the same people who, talked about implanting computers in their head. Like that was a desirable thing. And this sort of idea of like transcending into this singularity. It's a minority of humanity, but that minority made a lot of money. And that money bought them the ability to, get a spotlight and get airtime. And we listened to them and we deferred to them on the future. Look, we're here. It's November 2020. Crypto's in flames. The Schadenfreude is so delicious. I couldn't even tell you why. Because how many times did I endure from crypto bros that I knew or had contact with lectures, endless diatribes about how crypto and blockchain was the future, and I'm an idiot for following fiat currency and blah, 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 and how dare I question it, and I'm a Luddite. And, I got this criticism as a critic of this world, legitimately, right? Because in that world, when you're in it, there's an element of sort of cultishness to it, right? There's an element of closing the blinders, and you could build these echo chambers, in Twitter or Telegram or whatever app you want in social media. And it's like, it's the same as people in the sort of Trump world. It's like you enclose yourself in that, you remove yourself from reality. I'm not saying everyone in that world who works in those industries is like that. Most people who work in tech are people like you and I, right? Who do their job and get some meaning from it. And I know a lot of great people, a lot of great friends, even friends who worked in blockchain that weren't rabid believers, but the core narrative of it was so attractive and so easy to sell because it gave a very simplified, linear vision of the future, right? Mm-hmm. And we like that as humans. We love a simple story. It's the basis of faith and religions and things like authoritarianism and fascism. How do we solve this problem? Well, it's, a complicated mix of sociopolitical factors or whatever. It's the Mexicans, right? It's like, oh, okay, that's the message I'm going to get. Or how do we solve this? Well, it's going to involve different levels of government funding to change public schools. We might have to change tax brackets. No. Kids are going to do it in virtual reality, and that's going to change everything. One laptop per child. We're just going to give laptops to kids in Africa, not a specific country in Africa, just Africa. And as soon as those kids have those laptops, we'll beam them the best lectures in the world, and they'll be smarter. And that'll be the problem. The problem of Africa will be solved, right?
So you just helped me and the audience imbibe 2007 in a 30-second period. Just like you can, once again, I want to be clear about this, David. Like you were saying this in a parodying way, but you're almost word for word. You could change the tone of what you're describing, and that would actually articulate like a certain set of
Nicholas
discourse.
Negroponte. I'm literally talking about airdropping.
This is for YouTube people. I have to show this. So there was this amazing company that did a fun drop. Audio listeners, check out the YouTube at this point. This is the laptop that was made. It was this was a fun drop that a tech company put together, failed tech products. So I've got the Theranos machine, and this is the one laptop per child. It's my favorite. I've never had a chance to bring out the background good. But I'm excited. So here's a question, because you brought up being a Luddite, and this is actually very helpful. What is the difference between someone like yourself who thinks that the advantages of the analog are understated and that people are overhyping the digital, and a Luddite? Someone who just has a pathological bias against technology or technological change, like once again, like it's a pejorative. So, but like within reason, like what is the difference between yourself and an actual Luddite?
Okay, well, the actual Luddite was like a movement in 19th century Britain of people who saw that the mechanization of
the loom and
the loom was going to destroy their livelihood, which it did, and they would rebel against it. It was a rebellion. In the modern context, it's someone who rejects technology. I'm speaking to you from my MacBook. Here's my phone. Here's my AirPods. I don't have an Alexa in my house, but like I use digital technology all the time, but I don't blindly accept it. I engage in critical thinking about digital technology. And that's something that most of us as a society have failed to do. From an individual level, from a household level, we're like, oh, this Alexa thing is great. Okay, that's awesome. Without questioning why it's a good thing. Oh, I should sign up for this. I should sign my kids up for Facebook Messenger. Sure. Yeah. Why not? And from a bigger societal level, like the amount of time politicians in any country, in any sort of level, will like go up on stage with the founder of tech companies to like get some of that, innovative shine on them. And it's like, oh, we're going to give this project over to this company, and that's making us innovative. I mean, here in Toronto, we almost gave away one of the biggest, most valuable parcels of downtown waterfront real estate to Google to build their sidewalk Toronto sort of demonstration smart city, which eventually, got run out of town because it was like a nightmare of privacy and just ridiculousness that no one really had any say in. It wasn't part of a democratic thing, but the government here, every level, the sort of city government, the provincial government, the federal government, they were like, this is great. We're going to be a leader. We're going to be an innovative city. It's like Toronto's an innovative city already. We didn't need Google to like grant it that. But there was this, I don't want to say celebrity, but there was this altruism, this shine around Silicon Valley. And it comes from different places, right? This is like a magical thing that really did transform much in the world. And we're still chasing after that. And we're still chasing after sort of the internet. Like these innovations have been tremendous. And there's this attraction to sort of get at them and not miss out on the next big thing, or we'll be left in the dust. Right. And I think you see that with everything. There's this pressure to not miss out, which is why people got into Bitcoin. People got into, these ideas about AI without critically thinking around them. And I think and the other thing is, actually I heard Professor Galloway, talking about this the other day on CNN when he was talking about Twitter, the collapse of FTX or something else. He's like, as we become less religious, like we've looked to these individuals in tech as these deities. Steve Jobs, like this godlike figure. I had a roommate who had a poster of Steve Jobs up, but nobody had a poster of Henry Ford up, or a poster of Lee Iacocca. Maybe some.
There's definitely a weirder or two who had that.
Some schmuck NBA in 1985 shows up in his 3-piece suit to Wharton. And you're like, dude, get a life.
Something I'm really curious about then is let's actually talk about what happened in the context of a couple of different categories. Let's start with education. This is interesting to me because this is the area where I still don't think people have taken the discourse on this topic to its logical conclusion. So just give me a second here. So what I do a lot of interviews with tech founders, especially people in the higher education ed tech space. And oftentimes there's this big in Austin,
really
exactly.
Big in Austin. Yep.
There's this conventional wisdom, like generic shibboleth. Like you talk about how, you mentioned like the fourth industrial revolution idea, like when you're in South Korea, that's just sort of like a generic phrase that people kind of use. But I think these generic phrases tend to kind of be like warning signs of people looking for like thought leadership buzzword over critical thinking. And the version of thought leadership buzzwordification that you have in the ed tech space is, man, like, our schools are just like factories. It's like the turn of the 20th century. And, back then, like it was all these like capitalists trying to make everyone fit into cogs, and it wasn't personalized. It wasn't specific. It was trained to sit at a desk for 8 hours and then you leave. And they basically articulate this. And that resonated with people. This is a rhetorical tack that's taken, but that critique of schooling doesn't sync up with how angry everyone got over not being able to send their kids to in-person schooling over the past 2 or 3 years. So what's so funny, I see on the one hand, ed tech kind of like libertarian leaning founders routinely talking about how broken our education system is along the reasons they're describing. Yet on the other hand, one of the most politicized topics in the Western world right now is the debate over why were our schools closed so long and why does everyone hate what they got instead. So can you kind of talk about like the contradictions here between the supposed outmodedness of the analog school system with how pissed off, I don't have kids, so I'm viscerally experiencing it, but how pissed off everyone got over the digital equivalent?
Sure. I saw that you had someone from the Teal Fellowship on recently who's, this is the drum he's beating, and I think he runs a fraternity at Singularity U or something like that. This goes back to Edison, right? When he came out with radios and film. And he's like, listen, we don't need schools. Children don't need to sit in these lectures, these physical places. We can broadcast the best lectures in the world at them. People were saying this when they came up with encyclopedias, like, the children could teach themselves. This is the foundational
knowledge in the Encyclopedia Britannica.
All the knowledge in the world in the palm of your hand. This is what led Nicholas Negroponte to this dream of one laptop per child, that it was just, if we could just deliver the information to them. But information isn't education. And the thing that really pisses me off consistently, and I wrote about it in both books, with the failure of ed tech, is it's too industries and areas. Speaking of which, my child is home right now screaming downstairs. So we can get into that reality later. I might yell, shut up. I won't text my wife. She should know better, my daughter. But let's just keep this in context. 2 areas that should know better, right? Education and technology. Both industries that should be founded on the scientific method and rigor and data. And there have been experiments in various formats of remote school at every sort of level of schooling for decades, right? With film, with CD-ROMs, with video courses. Remember going into school and they would like wheel in the video cart and play these things, right? With, websites, with the MOOC movement Sebastian Thurn and the
Can you
brilliant
explain
minds at Google.
Can you explain the acronym?
Massive open online course. Basically, you can click and there'll be a video lecture from the best universities for everyone. And the idea was
2013.
Yes,
we did 2007.
2013.
We're getting the 2013 energy.
This is going to change it. And every university is like, oh man, yeah, how do we get on board with this? Like, this is incredible because not only will it save us tremendous costs, we can have one professor teaching like thousands now, but like we can open up Harvard to the world. We can have MIT lectures in Africa, always Africa. And this was the thing of like, we can liberate the school from its confines. And it was tried and it failed before the pandemic consistently everywhere that remote learning was tried, everywhere that like kids were given laptops as a substitute, anytime that tech was introduced not to augment learning, but to take the place of a teacher and a school, whether it's a kindergarten, middle school, high school, university, it failed. It failed in the scores. It failed in the assessments. It failed in the self-assessments, failed in completion. MOOCs, when Udacity or whatever it is, did the courses with, I think it was UC Santa Cruz. It was like 90% of students didn't finish the course. They didn't watch all the lectures and do the assignments. 90%, right? Only 10% did. That's not like, let's look at the numbers. That is like a horrendous failure. If you were a professor at a university and 90% of your students didn't finish the course, you would be fired.
Yeah, because to your point, that's not even about having a failing grade. That's not even everyone gets Fs. That's actually
if you ran a university and 90% of the students didn't show up and didn't finish the course, your university's done. It's done. Okay. And yet that narrative was so powerful. And people kept selling it. They're like, oh, well, it's just a problem with the technology. It's a problem with teachers. It's the unions. It's these lazy teachers. They're not figuring out how to use the tech for real. Look how David Sedaris teaches a course on masterclass. Why can't the English teacher be like that? A, they're not David Sedaris. B, they don't have the money behind it. C, David Sedaris is not teaching a university course. He's just giving lectures on how to write. And David Sedaris can do no wrong in my own, right? Why is this? Because education and information are two different things. The computer is fabulous at transferring information. Do you want to know facts and figures? Look them up, right? You could find anything you want in the world on this. And that's why students all over the world use computers to do research. My daughter, who's in 4th grade, did a wonderful presentation a few weeks ago on sea otters. And she learned all the stuff online, right? She didn't go to the library. She maybe got one book, but like they didn't have that many books on libraries and on otters at her, Toronto Public School Library. So she did it online and teacher made sure she fact checked stuff and went through the right sources and she built it in Google Docs and she printed it out and gave a presentation in front of the class. But what was the learning that happened for her there? It wasn't that she learned how otter mothers wrap their babies in kelp when they go hunting, which, by the way, if you've seen a picture of, oh my God, it's the cutest thing in the world. I'm now wrapping my children in kelp at night. It's how to think critically, how to do research, how to go and edit your work, how to stand up in front of a class of peers and other humans and present your ideas. And I had a parent-teacher meeting with her teacher a few days later. And the way he spoke about it, he had put so much care into it. He clearly had gone and helped her in all these different areas. And that is a relationship, a human relationship, a face-to-face relationship. And that relationship is the core of all education. And that is cut off when you do this, when you do it through a screen. I had my other son during kindergarten. He was during lockdown. He was in junior kindergarten, or pre-K, as you call it in America. Do you know what it's like to see 25 4-year-olds on a screen trying to like learn what it's like to be a human being in society?
I hope to never discover the answer to that question.
And then they like jump on your body and pull down their pants, right? It's brutal. Think about your entire educational experience. Can you remember the things you learned? Do you remember the facts and figures, all the way? Or do you remember the personalities of the teachers and their relationships to you? Whether we're talking about, elementary school teachers, high school teachers, where you went to university, right? I remember some of the lectures of professors at university, some of the things I was taught, but I still have relationships with those teachers. One of my teachers is Mr. Vernon, my history teacher, is coming to my book launch next week, right? And that relationship actually allows you to care about the learning. It's what allows you to absorb and process and turn the facts and information into knowledge. And this is what we consistently miss. And I think what happened during the pandemic, when every student in the world, except for maybe like a few in New Zealand, went online for months or years at a time, everyone saw this plain as day. And no one is rushing back to put children in front of screens or students in front of screens. The best universities in the world, none of them are going like, you know what? We're permanently moving online. Like we're doing more and more of this stuff online. No, the core of education is relational, and relationships are built in the analog world.
So I want to speak up for Michael Gibson, the Teal Fellowship co-founder, for a second. Just get your perspective on, I think, the like steelman good faith articulation of what the critique of the analog is in the case of higher education. Let's put aside K-12 for a second. So the advantage of digital, like, jokes about, cringe Africa references aside, look, what's the problem of Harvard and MIT? Harvard and MIT, despite the huge size of their endowments, have not actually expanded the number of seats in their classes when they obviously could. So the advantage of the digital here would be, hypothetically, you could democratize and actually expand access to maybe even like the credential. So in a world where like Harvard is going to say, hey, like, what we're going to do? Like, we're going to build a few like extra dorms. We're going to increase the size of the class by like 200 people a year till we hit a certain threshold, rather than just keep this to be treat this as a nightclub. That system could work too. And then the other critique of the like higher ed system is just like the credentialing aspect. So like, just the idea that like, once again, are you actually paying for like what you're learning, or are you paying for like a union card once again that doesn't actually demonstrate your actual knowledge, which is why we have like a huge like dropout non-graduation rate problem. So what would you say to like this, like the good faith critique of the analog status quo in higher ed? 'Cause I think that's the most compelling one. The K through 12 stuff, like you said, like super complicated. You're really just like, I think, kind of trying to use digital technology to get over the fact that public policy is super hard if you like sum up the K through 12 stuff. But the higher ed one, I think that's really compelling to me. So what do you say to the good faith critique?
I think it is made in good faith. I mean, Thiel and his proto-fascism aside.
We're bracketing to a very specific critique of higher admissions policies at elite universities for the purposes of this conversation.
There's truth to it, right? Especially the American system. In Canada, we have all public universities. To get into university here, you submit your marks, right? That's it. There's no like, I played on the lacrosse team and like, here's an essay and I volunteered building houses or whatever. It's like, here's your marks. Here's the 3 schools you want to go into. You got into this one, right? The thing about Harvard and MIT and whatever, the other places that people wear sweatshirts from, is the value of those places is not what you learn there. The value is that exclusivity. The value is, being part of this tribe, and nowhere more so than in America. No one in Canada wears T-shirts and sweatshirts from where they went to university. I mean, they do, but they do it like doing laundry at home. Whereas like I go to the Upper East Side of Manhattan, my brother used to live there, and it's like everybody jogging in their Vassar shirts or whatever the hell, Yale, but the truth is, when you think back to your university experience, and where did you go to?
University of Oregon.
University of Oregon. Go Badgers.
Ducks. Wow.
Ducks. Okay.
Wisconsin, closer to you in Canada. So I get why that was the first one you thought
of. When you think back to it, do you, the things that matter to you from there, is it what you learned or who you learned with? Right.
So here's and this is where it gets problematic. So yeah, correct. Like I literally do not remember a single thing I learned in college. Like I do this exercise. Like I can do it for K-12, but I actually don't remember. But that's a problem. Do like
is it? It's because what did you major in, Michael?
Poli-sci. No worries, poli-sci.
Okay.
But here's the problem though, right? I'm upper middle class. I didn't like taking any like student debt. I screwed around for like 5 years, and now I get to host a podcast and get paid to talk to people. Thank you, Hewlett Foundation. That system works for people like me. It doesn't
100%.
work for a lot of people.
100%. And that is a problem. That is a complex issue related to politics, taxes, things like affirmative action, which probably not exist in a few weeks in the United States, and all these other ways that we prioritize education. My kids their school's probably going to be closed on Monday because there's going to be an education strike because the conservative government here in Ontario is trying to withhold, raises for the education support staffs, the early childhood educators, the janitors, right? The support staff of the public school, because we can't afford it, even though we afford all sorts of other dumb stuff. That is a bigger question. And the idea that the solution to it is we're just going to blow up the buildings and the school will be delivered through this. What's going to come from that? If let's say this happened, let's say the Thiel people, get their way and Harvard's like, you know what? We're done with Harvard, right? We're selling off the buildings in Cambridge, and everything's going to be online. What would become of Harvard? Its value would plummet because the thing about Harvard is that presence there. And that's inseparable from reality. And, it's nothing will, there's no technology that you can create that could change that. You could make it more real. You could put on goggles and virtual reality and make it seem like there's a Harvard thing. And you could have people attend fake frat parties and whatever. But the virtue of Harvard is going and being there, and the people and the people you meet. It's the relationships you build, right? Think about career, all the relationships that lead to opportunities. And it's not like a inside old boys club thing. I mean, I'm sure it is, if you're part of like Skull and Bones, but even for you must have friends from University of Oregon, go Ducks, that you've asked for, hey, do you know anyone who's doing this? Or I have this podcast. Do you have anyone? Oh, wow, this is cool, right? It's human relationships. That's the way the world works. And the idea that we can strip that out and create this sort of egalitarian, perfect way that's sort of balanced by algorithm and technology is naive about humanity. What we have to do is work to build better, more equitable systems of education, right? I'll give you an example. In your country, the United States of America, the tax funding for public schools is localized. So I remember my friend works for the Boston Bruins. He's my university roommate from Toronto, works for the Bruins, lives in a very nice suburb of Boston, huge house, right? We're driving by this place. I'm like, what is that? Have 4 seasons? He's like, no, that's the elementary school where my kid's going to go. Like this was like, if I Am Pie designed this place, you couldn't have made like a better looking building where my kids are going to like the same brick asbestos kind of thing that I went to, right? And the difference is like that school is getting 10 times more tax dollars because of where it is than, the school in South Boston or whatever sort of a less advantaged area is, right? Here or in Europe or in Korea or other countries where, by the way, the school systems rank much higher on a global scale in terms of their performance of educating people. Like America's in the low middles in terms of school system performance. The tax funding is equal. So like every student in a particular state or province or region gets the same amount of funding. It's allocated equally. Now that means it kind of brings it into the middle. So you don't get these superstar schools where they have like pools and squash courts and, every kid gets to go on like 5 trips a year. But it creates a greater sense of equality. It doesn't mean it's perfect. The leading school system in the world is Finland, right? Consistently ranks among the top. And it's not that they use more technology and better technology. They use technology in schools, but the school is more relational. It's all about creating better humans and citizens. It's very humanistic. And I think when we get technocratic into the solutions of it, we're missing the point of what education is about. Education is not about teaching people things. Yeah, you need a basis of language and arithmetic and the understanding of science, but it's about teaching critical thinking. It's about getting people to think about their place in a society. It's about teaching them sort of who they are and giving them an idea of bigger things. And that is something that is, I think, impossible to achieve by doing your school this way.
I think what's
end rant.
No. And I think the helpful way to square the circle here is that everyone, even, everyone from Teal World to you, can offer legitimate critiques of the status quo in K through 12 and education at the higher education level. But what you would point out here is that the question is the solution to that broken status quo tech disruption, or is it a deeply human set of often public policy centric challenges? I think
Listen, if the tech disruption would have worked, it would have worked.
It's been 15 years, right?
But not only that, in 2020 and 2021, every school in the world, every school system in the world tried this, right? So I have friends who run the tech program at the fanciest private schools in a city like this, right? We're talking, God only knows how much these people pay a year to send their kids there, right? It didn't work there. So you can't blame the funding, you can't blame the teachers on it. It didn't work in amazing places like Finland. It didn't work in Korea, right? No school system's like, oh yeah, this works. We're moving on with this. Everyone was like, whew, we're done with that. Back to class, everybody. So if it would have worked, show me the evidence. Show me the evidence instead of saying that. And here's the thing about all these, tech libertarians who rage at the idiocy of higher education, right? 95% of them went to Ivy League schools, graduated from Ivy League schools, made their contacts at Ivy League schools. And then what? They read Ayn Rand one day and that was it? Come on. They're still using their Stanford contacts. They're still using their Stanford network. They're getting the Hoover Institution to write their stupid papers for them. Yet.
I think the good place to end here would be to the future part, right? So we discussed 2007, 2013, why 2020 to 2022 didn't work out. Just people need to purchase the book. It's really enjoyable. By the way, there's a funny anecdote that was very viscerally experienced when you were describing how we're going to tell our grandchildren how awful a Zoom happy hour is. I think everyone went to one. And it just really was so there's lots of good anecdotes. I think
it's the antithesis of the word happy hour. It's miserable minutes.
It's miserable minute, and it was minutes in my case because I did the whole black out your screen and then surreptitiously leave thing. Let's talk about the future for a second. Folks can get more of this from the book, but I'd love for you just to close with what does a more balanced analog with digital enhancement, as all these things are. We're doing this over Zoom, but I hope people buy the paper copies of your book. What does that look like?
What it looks like is a lot like the present and the life we have, right? And acknowledging that there are certain things in our lives that we value. And we value those things because we're human beings with bodies in a physical world. And we need to relate to that world as physical beings, right? So we value meeting people in person and having important conversations with them face to face, whether it's work or social or for other purposes. We value schools, right? As a space in a community where all sorts of things happen, from daycare as a most basic sort of thing to a ground for forming relationships and learning about ideas that have nothing to do with the facts and figures taught there. We value a life beyond screens, so that on a Friday night in Austin, a city with tremendous nightlife, you can go out in town and you can eat at amazing restaurants and you can go see incredible music and you can feel alive and part of a community as part of that, right? We value communities, not just as places that are like efficient places to sleep and whatever, but actually as these sort of living, breathing, dynamic, and highly imperfect incubators of human creativity and ingenuity. And we realize the things that make them that is not that they're the most efficient at getting us from A to B. It's the messy parts. It's walking down 6th Street at night and, it's kind of dirty and loud and whatever. And that makes you feel like you're part of somewhere. It's having those relationships with your neighbors. It's places like Barton Springs, my favorite place in Austin. This giant natural pool that was built by the US Park Service like 100 years ago. And you go there on a sunny day and you're just like swimming in this tributary of the Colorado River, and there's people everywhere and you get into conversations. That's what makes Austin, not Dell. Like Dell's great, right? And all the other companies that are there, they're places to work, but like that doesn't make the city what it is. So it's acknowledging that we as humans have needs, human needs, and those needs most generally are met with analog solutions, right? We need time outdoors. We need relationships with other people. We need to be fed. We need to be stimulated. We need conversations. And if we can keep that at the center of our thoughts, then any new technology that comes along and we're being sold, we'll be able to judge that on a critical basis. We'll be able to say, hey, does this actually help those needs? Does this strengthen those needs? Does this serve me as a human? Or is this kind of trying to do away with that? Is this trying to lessen my experience as an individual for convenience or the profit of someone else or some sort of crypto scam that I'm glad I didn't buy into?
Yeah, I mean, just the note I'll end on is I think we didn't talk about the workplace as much, but I think the real rubric for really thinking about this here is the real, at first, like the remote work thing was, and I know you've always like worked remotely, like you're a writer, but the remote work pivot felt freeing for folks right away. Like, hey, like you've got back that hour
I'm in my
commute.
Sweatpants.
You could wear whatever you want, but then you're getting Slack messages at 11 p.m. And you realize that that in exchange for losing a commute, which by the way, I think within reason, right? Like if you're commuting an hour and a half in Austin from like, that's terrible. But if, I was in DC during the pandemic and actually like there's a functioning metro system, those 40 minutes, it was great. It was great.
So I was in DC the other day,
yeah.
And I had to get to my event in Capitol Hill and I was in the Smithsonian and I got one of those Lime e-bikes and like zipped up the hill. Almost got killed by the Capitol. And it was amazing. And there's bike lanes there like that. That's a technology that's made DC better. Subways, right? All these things. It's what is going to enrich our lives as humans. But I think it's acknowledging that truth. We are not Borgs. We're not digital beings. We're not going to, ascend to some sort of digital singularity. We are human. We're flesh and blood creatures. We have bodies. We have needs. We have souls, if you want to believe in that, or at least some yearning for a deeper meaning. And if we can keep that front and center, then any future that we move into is going to work with us as long as we can judge that critically, because new technology is going to keep coming along. The advances in robotics and AI and whatever else they're coming up with, right? And that's fine, but we're still going to be human. That's the truth. And as long as we can keep that front and center, then we'll be able to build a better future.
Really well said. David, we'd love for you to shout the book out by name. It's available in our bookshop. Support independent booksellers, speaking of the theme of the conversation, but also Amazon. What's the book again?
The book is called The Future is Analog, How to Create a More Human World. It's on sale wherever finer books are sold. Yeah. Go to an independent bookstore if you have one near you. Go buy the book from them. You're supporting a business in your community that not only sells chunks of paper, it's a place where kids can go and learn and explore ideas. You can have events. You can meet people. It's great. If you want to order the book online, you can order it from Amazon. You can also order from bookshop.org, which is a great example of a tech platform, entirely digital, that supports independent bookstores. You're going to get the book for pretty much the same price. It's going to be shipped pretty much the same time. But a percentage of that money is going to go to independent bookstores or the independent bookstore of your choice. So check it out. And thank you for hearing my ramblings.
For sure. Thanks for joining me on the show.